guardians of the mist, the forgotten realm of the Chachapoya. Our journey now leads us to the mist-draped peaks of northern Peru, where a mysterious civilization once thrived. The Chachapoya Spanish conquistadors dubbed them the Cloud People, a title that echoes to this day. Nestled high in the Andean mountains, they lived within the fog-laced forests that today mark the outer edges of the Peruvian Amazon. Unlike the dry, open landscapes of the Pueblones, this region is steep, verdant, and tangled with vines and moss. The air hangs heavy with mist, the valleys are tight and precipitous, and the land is wild and relentless. Amidst this rugged terrain, you'll find remnants of a resilient people, their structures hugging cliffs and lining ridgetops, silent witnesses to centuries of habitation. Emerging around 800 CE, possibly even earlier, the Chachapoya civilization never formed a grand empire like the Inca or Mocha. They did not carve out vast highways or command large territories. Rather, they flourished as a collection of independent settlements, mountaintop villages, fortified enclaves, and secluded hamlets that seamlessly blended into the mountainous surroundings. Despite their remote position and relative obscurity compared to Peru's more famous cultures, the Chachapoya left behind a legacy that is both remarkable and haunting. Their most well-known site is Kulap, sometimes dramatically labeled the Machu Picchu of the North, though the comparison doesn't quite capture its uniqueness. Situated on a lofty ridge some 3,000 meters above sea level, Kulap is an enormous stone complex. Its outer walls climb to 60 feet high and enclose over 400 circular structures. From afar, the site appears almost mythical, a stone fortress in the clouds, enveloped in jungle and mist. Unlike the polished precision of Machu Picchu, the construction here is rugged yet commanding, with stones weighing several tons. Entryways are narrow and funnel-like, designed primarily for defense rather than elegance. Built for endurance, Kulap stands as a testament to fortitude. Within its walls, buildings follow a circular design with low entrances and slim niches chiseled into their interiors. Many feature decorative friezes etched into the stone, zigzags, diamonds, and serpent-like patterns, their meanings still a mystery, yet repeated often enough to hint at shared beliefs or a symbolic language not yet understood. Despite its magnitude, Kulap remained largely unknown outside the region until the 1800s, when local farmers brought it to broader attention. Since then, the site has undergone limited excavation and restoration, though large sections remain untouched, overgrown, and enigmatic. The enduring intrigue of the Chachapoya lies not just in their architecture, but in their position at the edge of recorded history. They inhabited a liminal space, geographically, between coastal civilizations and the vast Amazonian wilderness, and historically between regional independence and imperial rule. When the Inca expanded during the 15th century, the Chachapoya were among those absorbed into the empire, but not without resistance. Spanish chroniclers, writing after the conquest, portrayed the Chachapoya as proud, autonomous, and defiant. They were one of the last groups the Inca managed to conquer, and among the first to resist Incan dominance. Their homeland, full of hidden paths and fortified ridges, was notoriously difficult to control. Even under Incan rule, they maintained a spirit of resistance. When the Spanish arrived in the 1530s, some Chachapoya aligned themselves with the newcomers, not out of reverence, but as a strategic move to free themselves from Incan rule. That choice, however, came with a devastating cost. The Spanish brought with them not only weapons and horses, but also diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza illnesses, to which the Chachapoya, like many indigenous populations across the Americas, had no immunity. Within a few generations, entire communities were gone. Populations dwindled. Languages, rituals, and ancestral knowledge vanished. What endures is largely what was carved in stone and the fragile remains of the dead. The Chachapoya are perhaps most recognized by archaeologists for their distinctive burial practices. Across sheer cliffs and inside isolated caves, They left behind preserved human remains, often mummified, some enclosed in sarcophagi, shaped like upright human forms, adorned with painted faces and folded arms, arranged along narrow ledges high above the ground. In other instances, they entombed their dead in hidden natural alcoves, sealed with stones and mud, concealed for centuries. Many of these burial sites are nearly inaccessible, requiring arduous climbs or treks through treacherous jungle terrain, but their locations feel intentional, observant, perhaps even protective. The dead weren't cast away, but placed where they could still observe the living world, perhaps guarding it. Among the most iconic of these are the sarcophagi at Karagia, a line of towering humanoid figures built directly into a cliff face, each over 2 meters tall. They resemble statues, but are hollow within each one, cradling a wrapped body, placed upright. Their faces are stylized, their expressions calm, almost otherworldly. They've stood watch for centuries, battered by wind and rain, overlooking the valley in solemn silence. Elsewhere, archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of mummies inside Chachapoya burial towers, many still shrouded in woven cloths. Some are curled like infants. Others sit cross-legged with folded arms. Their preservation is astonishing, and more than that, they seem to radiate emotion. These were not careless interments. They were ceremonial, reverent, carefully planned. We may never fully understand what the Chachapoya believed about death. Their language is gone. Their myths survive only as faint echoes. Yet their treatment of the deceased and their integration of the dead into the landscape suggests they saw death not as the end, but a presence that lingered, an enduring part of life's continuum, and that presence can still be felt today. Hiking through Chachapoya lands, it feels as though the past clings to every branch and stone. The trails snake through dense forest, past ruins smothered in moss, along forgotten terraces. Trees pierce through old walls, birdsong drifts through the mist. Occasionally you'll stumble upon a structure, a doorway, a carved stone, a niche, a silent marker that life once flourished here. The Chachapoya didn't vanish overnight. They faded, slowly, silently, overtaken by jungle, empire, and time. What's left are their walls, their patterns, their tombs, and the echoes of their names in distant chronicles. But more than that, there's a feeling, a whisper through the fog and stone, a quiet testament that these people once lived here, richly, deeply, long before the forest reclaimed its hold. For all that's been lost, the Chachapoya left behind a realm of memory and wonder. Though we may never fully recover their story, their legacy still lingers, etched into the ridge lines, watching from the cliffs, whispering through the Andes, not loudly, but undeniably. Sogdians, the silent weavers of the Silk Road. From sunlit coasts to the windswept steppes of Central Asia, we now journey inland to a land where deserts stretch endlessly and snow-capped peaks rise in the distance, where the whispers of ancient caravans still ride the breeze. For generations, this region served as the artery of the Silk Road, a vital channel that joined east and west through trade, philosophy, and quiet ambition. And threading themselves into that tapestry were the Sogdians, merchants, interpreters, artisans, and envoys who shaped a civilization not with force, but with flow. Unlike empires that relied on armies or stone fortresses, the Sogdians built their strength in the margins, in the bustling oases, the busy trading outposts, and the winding roads that stitched together China and the Mediterranean. Their homeland, known as Sogdiana, lay in modern-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, nestled between the rivers Zeravshan and Amu Darya. In cities like Samarkand, Panjshir, and Bukhara, Sogdian life blossomed. While their cultural roots trace back to the 6th century BCE, their golden age arrived centuries later, between the 4th and 8th centuries CE, when they earned their reputation as the vital pulse of the Silk Road. Though precious silk from China, fragrant spices from India, polished silver from Persia, and fine glassware from Rome changed hands along these ancient trade paths, it was often the Sogdians who orchestrated the exchanges. They weren't mere traders, they were cultural couriers, transporting stories, religions, and languages alongside material goods. Their cities were melting pots of global influences. Samarkand, the crown jewel among them, wasn't merely a trading hub, it was a cosmopolitan center. Here, Sogdians built sanctuaries, marketplaces, caravanserais, and expansive homes. Their artistry reflected a rich fusion: Persian elegance, Indian symbolism, and Chinese precision. Their murals painted scenes of feasts, dancing, mythic creatures, and nobility draped in garments from distant lands. Sogdian society didn't just accept diversity, it thrived because of it. Their approach to religion was equally pluralistic. Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Manichaeism, and eventually Nestorian Christianity were practiced side by side. Temples to opposing faiths often stood within the same city, reflecting a spiritual landscape as flexible as their trade networks. Their language, Sogdian, an Eastern Iranian tongue with a unique script, served as a commercial and diplomatic lingua franca, found on records and inscriptions across China, Mongolia, and Persia. Communities of Sogdian traders established roots far from home, especially in Chinese metropolises like Chang'an, modern Xi'an, where they acted as essential middlemen between dynasties and nomadic tribes. Some Sogdians rose to prominence in foreign courts, serving as generals, governors, or royal envoys, yet always maintained their ties to the merchant roots and kinship ties that anchored their identity. Still, the Sogdians never unified under a single flag. Sogdiana remained a network of independent cities and loosely allied territories, connected by language, commerce, and cultural bonds rather than political might. This fluidity was their strength. They navigated the rise and fall of empires, from the Achaemenids and Alexander the Great to the Kushans and Temps dynasty, without losing themselves. The artwork and literature they left behind provide vivid snapshots of their world. At Panjakand, brilliantly preserved frescoes show weddings, musicians, hunts, and tales from Persian and Indian mythology. These weren't abstract gods, but human-like figures caught in vibrant, everyday moments. Sogdian culture was deeply humanistic, centered not on conquest, but on connection. Even in their burial customs, their multicultural essence endured. Sogdian tombs found in China, like that of the official Anjia in Shanshou, a blend of identities, loyal to Chinese emperors, yet proudly Sogdian in dress and tradition. Their graves bear images of grand banquets, exotic animals, dancers from distant lands, and long processions of traders, offering a glimpse into a world constantly in motion. So, what became of them? The Sogdians didn't fall in a blaze of destruction. Their decline was slow and layered. As Islam spread through Central Asia in the 8th century, many Sogdians adopted the new faith, some willingly, others under duress. A defining moment came with the Battle of Talas in 751 CE, when Arab forces clashed with the Thames dynasty. This marked a major shift in regional power. The intricate trade web the Sogdians once mastered began to fray. Chinese influence in Central Asia receded, and Persian and Turkic cultures gained prominence. Over time, the unique Sogdian identity softened. Their cities lived on. Their roots remained active, but the distinct culture began to dissolve into its surroundings. By the 10th century, Sogdian, as a spoken language, had all but disappeared, replaced by evolving forms of Persian and Turkic dialects. Their writing, customs, and standalone identity faded, absorbed into the rich blend of Central Asian heritage, yet their influence lingered. The Sogdians helped shape the identity of later peoples, like the Uyghurs, the Tajiks, and others. They set the stage for the later Islamic golden age of cities like Bukhara and Samarkand, which would become global centers of knowledge, science, and art. Even the Mongols, centuries later, inherited the pathways, networks, and open-minded ethos the Sogdians had helped to build. Today, their name is rarely mentioned, but once they were everywhere and nowhere. They ruled no kingdoms, yet were essential to them all. They were the quiet architecture of the Silk Road, the thread that held the cloth together. And maybe that's why their story still feels powerful. Their legacy wasn't forged in fire or lost in battle. It drifted, resilient and light, like the fabric they helped trade across empires. So next time you hear of silk arriving in Rome or glass reaching China, think of the Sogdians. They were there, walking the deserts, climbing the passes, carrying letters, spices, and legends. They moved unseen, but their fingerprints are still everywhere, though the Sogdians are long gone. Their echo, like a whisper on the wind or a caravan bell in the distance, has never truly vanished. Whispers from the Zagros, the forgotten civilization of Elam, in the remote reaches of southwestern Iran, where river valleys weave between forbidding mountains and barren deserts, a lesser-known ancient civilization once flourished, overshadowed by the great Mesopotamian empires to the west and the rising Persians to the east. Elam carved out its own distinct legacy long before either power came to dominate the region. It had its own language, its own pantheon, and a legacy that unfolded quietly across thousands of years, before slowly vanishing with little noise or glory. This is the tale of the Elamites. The civilization of Elam first arose over 4 millennia ago, in a land known historically by the same name, Elam. It spanned from the eastern Zagros mountains to the low-lying plains that approached the Persian Gulf. Today, this territory lies primarily within modern Iran, while the earliest signs of Elamite culture trace back to the late 3000s BCE. Its most prominent historical period extended from around 2700 BCE to 539 BCE, stretch of nearly 2,000 years, longer than the time from the fall of Rome to our modern era. And yet, Elam remains mostly absent from mainstream history. Their legacy is one not of sweeping domination, but of endurance, often caught in the long shadow of better-known civilizations like Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and later Assyria. Elam still managed to preserve its unique cultural identity, language, and spiritual traditions. It was no passive neighbor, either. Elam engaged in frequent power struggles with its neighbors, and at times even succeeded in becoming a regional force, though fleetingly in a part of the world known more for conflict than calm. At the core of Elamite civilization stood the city of Susa, an ancient settlement that ranks among the longest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Established around 4200 BCE, Susa served as both the ceremonial and administrative center for Elam throughout much of its existence. Its city plan, artifacts, and inscriptions reflect a culture that was clearly influenced by Mesopotamian traditions, but still uniquely Elamite in expression. Elam was never entirely isolated, nor was it fully assimilated. Where Mesopotamia erected monumental ziggurats, and Persia later built opulent palaces, Elamite architecture remained more practical and restrained, often constructed with sun-dried brick. Their temples weren't grandiose, but functional, dedicated to deities like in Shushanak, the protector of Susa. Rituals included processions, offerings, and a belief in the afterlife, seen in burial customs and sacred buildings where the bones of royal ancestors were sometimes interred. One of the greatest enigmas surrounding Elam is its language. Elamite does not appear to be connected to any of the well-known language groups in the region. It is neither Semitic nor Indo-European, and today is considered a language isolate, meaning it has no proven relatives. Eventually, the Elamites adopted the cuneiform script from Sumerians, but used it to record their own unique language, a language we have only partially deciphered. As a result, much of Elamite thought, religion, and daily life remains locked in silence. Yet the fragments we do understand tell us much. They had a defined system of governance, sometimes led by kings, at other times by religious leaders or ruling coalitions. Their economy was grounded in farming, trade, and metalwork. Elamite craftsmen were highly skilled, producing bronze and later iron, tools, weapons, and ornamental items. Their pottery, though generally modest in design, was well made and perfectly suited to a demanding environment. The political trajectory of Elam was anything but simple. It rose and fell in rhythmic cycles, often shaped by the dominant powers of neighboring Mesopotamia. In its early phase, Elam engaged in both commerce and conflict with Sumerian city-states. Later, it clashed with the Akkadian Empire under Sargon the Great, who launched military campaigns deep into Elamite lands. But the Elamites were not easily subdued. They endured, adjusted, and evolved. During what historians call the Middle Elamite period, around 1500 to 1100 BCE, Elam experienced one of its most prosperous eras. Rulers like Untashnapirisha spearheaded impressive building projects, including a massive religious complex at Chagazanbil, one of the few Elamite sites still standing today. Its ziggurat, which honors both Elamite and Mesopotamian gods, is among the best preserved from the ancient world. This time also saw a burst of artistic creativity. The period gave rise to bronze sculptures, elaborate seals, and stone reliefs portraying ceremonial processions and religious rites. These artifacts display both native Elamite styles and foreign artistic influences, proving that Elam was deeply connected to the broader cultural currents of the ancient Near East, exchanging ideas as readily as it traded goods, and all the while their unique language continued to be spoken and recorded. But, as with many civilizations of antiquity, Elam's narrative was not one of uninterrupted strength. In the late 2nd millennium BCE, its power began to wane. To the west, new imperial players emerged: Assyria, Babylonia, and eventually Persia under the Achaemenid dynasty. Elam resisted these rising powers, sometimes aligning with Babylon against Assyrian aggression. Yet the Assyrians were relentless. In 647 BCE, Assyrian king Ashurbanipal led a devastating invasion into Elamite territory. Susa was ransacked, temples were desecrated, royal tombs were plundered. Ashurbanipal even inscribed boasts of Elam's annihilation on stone tablets, declaring the kingdom extinguished. This brutal campaign is often viewed as the final death knell of Elamite sovereignty. Still, Elamite culture did not vanish overnight. In the southern highlands, Elamite communities lingered for decades, gradually absorbed into the expanding Persian sphere. When Cyrus the Great established the Achaemenid Empire around 550 BCE, Elamite remained in use as one of the official languages of government, alongside Old Persian and Akkadian. The renowned Behistun inscription, etched into a mountainside in western Iran, includes Elamite text as one of its 3 scripts, a remarkable twist of fate for a culture supposedly destroyed. Even as their independence faded, the Elamites' voice lingered within the machinery of empire. Eventually, however, Elamite was replaced by Aramaic and Old Persian, and its memory slowly faded into obscurity. By the 19th and 20th centuries, only the stones remained. Archaeologists began to uncover the Elamite story through cuneiform tablets, ruined temples, and long-buried statues found across the Iranian plateau. Today, the remnants of Elam lie beneath layers of dust and history. The ruins of Susa still rise from the Khuzestan plain. Chogazanbil's great ziggurat stands silent under the Iranian sun, and scattered across museums are fragments of a civilization that endured for nearly 2 millennia, spoke a language no one else did, and left behind no grand conquest, only the quiet strength of resilience. Elam's legacy teaches us that not all greatness is loud. Some civilizations whisper their achievements through forgotten scripts, eroded monuments, and rituals long past. The Elamites never built sprawling empires across continents, but they persisted generation after generation in a land where survival was an achievement in itself. Though their names are mostly lost and their words only partially recovered, their presence continues to echo through excavation, research, and quiet narratives like this. They were not the most powerful, but they were among the earliest. And in the long unfolding story of human civilization, Elam holds a place both humble and haunting. A presence that did not disappear, it simply faded, like a distant ember glowing softly in the dark. Echoes of an ancient order, the Indus civilization, reimagined. The Indus civilization, often referred to as the Harappan civilization, was among humanity's earliest urban marvels, flourishing approximately between 2600 and 1900 BCE. Its origins reach back even further in time, and its cultural reverberations endured long after its decline. Nestled around the rich alluvial plains of the Indus River and its tributaries, this expansive society occupied much of what is now Pakistan and parts of northwest India. At the height of its development, the region contained hundreds of settlements, some modest agricultural hamlets, others densely populated cities, accommodating tens of thousands. What distinguishes this civilization, particularly considering its age, is the intentionality, precision, and technological advancement embedded in its urban fabric. Long before the ascendance of classical civilizations such as Greece and Rome, and even preceding Egypt and Mesopotamia's zenith, the inhabitants of the Indus region were quietly perfecting urban life. Cities such as Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Dholavira, and Rakhigarhi were not random accumulations of structures. They were purposefully laid out, engineered with precision, and surprisingly modern in their layout. Central to this innovation was their use of a specific kind of construction material, brick. But these weren't crude or irregular. They were kiln-fired and standardized in shape and size, produced using consistent molds. From Lothal to Mohenjo-daro, bricks matched in dimension, indicating a shared system of measurements, possibly coordinated by a centralized administration, or at least upheld by strong cultural norms akin to an early set of building regulations. Their roadways were equally impressive, unlike the narrow, winding lanes typical of other ancient centers. Streets in the Indus cities followed a grid-like design, often aligned with cardinal directions. Main thoroughfares were broad and straight, capable of accommodating carts and pedestrians alike. Smaller alleys branched from these, connecting residential quarters. This urban planning approach was far ahead of its time, echoing design principles that wouldn't become commonplace again until much later. However, it was in civic infrastructure that the Harappans truly excelled. Clean water access and waste management were integral to their urban structure, not add-ons. Public wells dotted neighborhoods and were used communally by nearby households. Many homes had private wells in their courtyards, signifying a balance between public provision and private utility. Residences were typically linked to an underground drainage system, covered brick-lined channels beneath the streets. Wastewater from bathrooms and kitchens flowed through these conduits into soak pits or brick cesspools, situated at a safe distance from living spaces. Even modest homes showed signs of indoor bathing spaces, with sloped floors and drainage outlets. More affluent structures revealed segregated zones for private and semi-public use, and some even housed primitive toilets. These practical, widespread systems speak volumes about a people who prioritized hygiene, order, and personal space. Water management didn't end at the household level. In cities like Dholavira, enormous reservoirs were excavated into the earth to store rainwater for dry seasons. Through the use of dams, channels, and sedimentation tanks, the Harappans controlled water flow and purity, a technique not unlike contemporary conservation practices. In Lothal, their genius extended to marine engineering. They built what is arguably the first tidal dockyard in the world, an enclosed harbor basin linked to the Gulf of Comhat via a channel. The tidal waters could enter and exit the dock, enabling ships to load and unload cargo regardless of water levels. This was more than ingenuity, it was groundbreaking, the mark of a people who understood their surroundings intimately and were willing to experiment on a grand scale. Part of their advancement stemmed from geography. The Indus and the now-defunct Gagahakra rivers offered rich floodplains perfect for supporting large populations. Seasonal floods replenished the soil, while the rivers served as natural trade routes. These natural advantages encouraged permanent settlements and motivated the creation of systems for safe, clean, and sustainable living. But it wasn't only geography. They were adaptable in every sense. Over generations, they developed tools, farming techniques, and construction methods that reflected both resourcefulness and ecological awareness. Plough-based agriculture, crop rotation, and irrigation show a deep understanding of environmental management. Interestingly, their urban centers reveal no overt signs of centralized religious or political power. Unlike Egypt's Grand Pyramids or Mesopotamia's ziggurats, the most prominent Harappan buildings were granaries, storage areas, and public baths, functional structures meant for collective use. This implies a civilization that prioritized utility over ostentation, collaboration over hierarchy. Their standardized practices, uniform bricks, weights, and city layouts likely evolved from practical needs, but were preserved through cultural stability. This was a culture not focused on glorifying rulers or gods through monuments. Instead, it flourished through systems, subtle, essential, and enduring. What's perhaps even more telling is the absence of expected artifacts. No palaces, no colossal temples, no statuary celebrating monarchs. If power existed in a centralized form, it didn't manifest in architecture. There are no known depictions of rulers, no inscriptions glorifying conquests. Their art, primarily seals, pottery, and miniature figurines, suggests a focus on craft, symbolism, and everyday life over spectacle. The iconic steatite seals are particularly enigmatic, adorned with animals, abstract motifs, and an undeciphered script. They remain one of archaeology's most tantalizing mysteries. Each inscription contains just a few characters, believed to be linked to trade or administration, but without a multilingual key, their meaning continues to elude scholars. Nevertheless, their existence points to literacy, organization, and a complex bureaucratic system. Far from being isolated, the Harappans maintained extensive trade links. Artifacts such as Indus seals have been unearthed in Mesopotamian sites. Goods like copper, ivory, beads, and textiles flowed along these routes, suggesting quiet but significant international influence. Agriculture formed the bedrock of their society. The fertile plains allowed the cultivation of wheat, barley, peas, sesame, perhaps early rice, and cotton. Livestock included cattle, goats, sheep, and buffalo. Farming methods varied by region, adapted to local conditions. This stable food production was key to sustaining their populous cities. Their artistic expressions leaned towards the intricate and intimate. The priest-king figurine from Mohenjo-Daro, a bearded man clad in a patterned robe, serene and reserved, has been interpreted variously as a leader, priest, or elder. The dancing girl, a bronze figure, barely 5 inches tall, strikes a confident pose, bangles on her arms, one hand on her hip, animated and bold. These artifacts hint at a society that was sophisticated, nuanced, and quietly vibrant. Religious practices remain speculative. Terracotta figurines of women suggest worship of a mother goddess. Animals, such as bulls and elephants, recur in art, possibly as spiritual symbols. One striking motif is a horned deity in a meditative posture, encircled by animals, linked by some to an early form of Shiva, though this remains conjectural. Around 1900 BCE, the civilization began to wane. Its decline wasn't marked by war or catastrophe. No burnt layers, mass graves, or invader narratives exist. Instead, cities were gradually deserted, trade diminished, the script fell out of use. Urban centers gave way to smaller, rural communities. Over time, the civilization faded from memory. Why this happened is still debated. Environmental factors are a major suspect. The rivers that sustained them, especially the Gagahakra, possibly the Sarasvati of legend, began to shift or dry up. Satellite imagery and geological surveys confirm such changes. These shifts would have disrupted agriculture, transport, and settlement. Climate change may also have played a role. Evidence indicates a period of growing aridity at the time. As rainfall lessened and floods became irregular, farming grew difficult. Despite their reservoirs and wells, the cities may not have coped. Additionally, if their social or economic systems failed to adapt, the urban fabric may have slowly unraveled. Without centralized leadership, coordination in the face of crisis, may have faltered. By the time the Vedic culture took hold centuries later, the Harappans were already a forgotten people, their language lost, their cities buried, their legacy obscured until the 1920s, when archaeologists at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro began unearthing ruins that defied expected timelines. They had rediscovered a forgotten giant, an ancient civilization rivaling Egypt and Mesopotamia in complexity and scale. Even now, much remains buried. Their script is still unreadable. Their political structure remains unclear. Yet in this mystery lies a quiet allure. Their legacy is not one of glory-hungry kings, but of systems that served people, streets that drained water, bricks that matched, cities that worked. In the quiet ruins of Mohenjo-daro, it still surprises the sheer scale, the craftsmanship, the great bath, a massive water tank, hints at ritual life. Surrounding it are rooms, colonnades, and open courtyards. The streets are linear, the masonry precise. The silence is not emptiness, but intention. Perhaps that's the essence of the Indus story. Not power, not conquest, but balance. A civilization that lived in harmony with its land and left behind a blueprint in brick, in drains, in symbols. A story that whispers instead of shouts. And even now, beneath Punjab's soil or Sindh's sands, that story continues to wait. Somewhere, under layers of dust, lies the next piece, a chamber, a seal, a name. And until then, the Indus Valley remains just as it always was, quiet, enduring, and profoundly enigmatic. Echoes of the islands, the vanished world of the Guanches. Leaving behind the citadels of Bronze Age Greece, we now journey far to the west, past the Strait of Gibraltar, where the Atlantic Ocean brushes the final edge of the known world. Here, scattered like fragments of ancient stone off the northwest coast of Africa, lie the Canary Islands. Today they shimmer as tourist havens, bathed in sunlight, but centuries ago, they occupied a much different space in the human imagination, remote, unreachable, and cloaked in myth. Upon these ocean-bound isles lived a people whose beginnings remain unclear. They left behind preserved corpses, hidden in mountain grottos, terraced pyramid-like formations, and whispers of a culture that has long since faded. These were the Guanches, the indigenous population of the Canaries, a volcanic archipelago made up of 7 principal islands, including Tenerife, Gran Canaria, La Palma, and Lanzarote. Though each island developed its own cultural nuances and governance structures, they all shared Guanche ancestry. For over a millennium, the Guanches lived with minimal contact from the outside world, largely cut off from Mediterranean and European civilizations, preserving a lifestyle that felt ancient even by the standards of their own time. The islands, shaped by lava and time, offered a uniquely gentle climate, temperate winters, mild summers, fertile lowlands, and jagged volcanic heights. The land itself, with its craggy ravines, volcanic caves, and quiet valleys, became central to the Guanche way of life. They took shelter in stone alcoves, buried their dead in cliffside tombs and lava tubes, and raised goats and sheep along winding paths in the hills. Their lives were modest but far from primitive. They created a self-reliant and enduring existence without metal tools or written language, tools fashioned from bone, stone, and which served daily purposes. Water was collected and stored in cisterns painstakingly chiseled into rock. On Tenerife in particular, they erected mysterious terraced platforms, low, stepped structures resembling pyramids, whose function remains unclear. Some argue they had agricultural uses, others believe they held ceremonial significance. Regardless, their construction reveals deliberate design and symbolic intention. One of the most compelling elements of Guanche culture was how they handled death. Across Tenerife and other islands, naturally preserved bodies have been uncovered, wrapped in animal hides or plant materials, and placed in mountain caverns. The preservation is astonishing. Skin, hair, and even facial features have survived the centuries. Though the mummification techniques remain partially unknown, they suggest a deep reverence for the dead and possibly a belief in life after death. In certain burial caves, individuals were interred according to status. Some historical accounts hint at important figures being ceremonially revisited or honored long after burial. Sadly, almost nothing of the Guanche language remains. A few words and place names have survived through oral tradition, but the language itself has vanished. Most experts believe it was linked to the Berber tongues of North Africa, a clue that the first inhabitants of the islands may have arrived by sea from the African mainland thousands of years ago. Exactly how they crossed remains debated. Some propose Neolithic sea travelers, others suggest accidental drift. But once the Guanches arrived, they stayed isolated for centuries, though largely forgotten by neighboring civilizations. Ancient Mediterranean records allude vaguely to paradises far to the west, fortunate islas, where spring never ended. These references may have pointed to the Canaries, feeding legends of islands untouched by time. To outsiders, the Canaries were fabled lands, but to the Guanches, they were simply home. Later, Spanish records describe a structured community life. Some islands were organized into tribes, and on Tenerife, leaders were known as menses. Each tribe governed its own territory, maintained herds, and followed distinct traditions. Laws were remembered through oral storytelling, and important decisions were made at communal gatherings. Music, dancing, and myth-sharing were woven into daily life. Clothing was modest, made from tanned hides or woven plant fibers. Then, in the 14th and 15th centuries, the tides shifted. European ships, first Portuguese, then Spanish, began appearing on the horizon. To these explorers, the Canary Islands were more than a curiosity. They were strategic stepping stones for Atlantic exploration and colonization. Perfectly placed between Europe and Africa, they brought chroniclers, conquistadors, missionaries, and disease. Initial contacts were a mixture of trade, curiosity, and conflict, but soon, the Spanish crown set its sights on conquest. The Guanches resisted fiercely. On islands like Tenerife and Gran Canaria, they used their knowledge of the terrain to wage guerrilla-style defense. They retreated into the mountains, launched ambushes, and guarded narrow passageways with only stone weapons and resolve against cavalry and steel. Occasionally, fragile truces were brokered. More often, brutal campaigns led to forced surrender. By 1496, the last Guanche stronghold had fallen. With the conquest complete, surviving Guanches faced a harsh transformation. Many were enslaved or killed by disease. Others were assimilated into the colonial framework, baptized, renamed, and relocated. Their culture was systematically suppressed. Their language faded from use. Their customs were banned or forgotten. In just a few generations, Guanche identity had nearly vanished, lingering only in shards of memory and archaeological remnants. Yet not everything was lost. In Tenerife sills, burial caves still lie hidden behind brush and basalt. In museums, mummified remains rest quietly, preserved witnesses to a distant world. Place names throughout the islands still carry the rhythm of Guanche words. Folk tales, dances, and local traditions preserve subtle echoes of their presence. And in recent decades, modern genetic studies have traced North African Berber lineage in the DNA of Canary Islanders, living proof that though their culture was colonized, the Guanches were never fully erased. Today, interest in the Guanche legacy is growing. Through archaeological digs, cultural preservation, and educational efforts, there's a movement to rediscover what remains. It's tempting to romanticize the Guanches as noble primitives, frozen in time, but the reality is more complex. They were shaped by isolation, tuned to their environment, spiritually aware, and ingeniously adaptive. They lived in balance with land and sea, building a society that endured without warfare or walls. Their world was compact, but it was whole. What makes their story especially haunting is how recent their disappearance was. This is not the ancient past. The final Guanche rebellion ended just over 500 years ago, after Columbus had already reached the New World. Their culture existed alongside the Renaissance. And yet, within decades, they were remembered mostly in passing, footnoted in colonial records, and unearthed from long-forgotten tombs. Stand today on a cliffside in Tenerife, gaze over the Atlantic from an old burial site, and there's a peculiar stillness in the air, not emptiness, but something felt. The islands remain, the wind still rustles the same trees. The bones, carefully placed generations ago, still lie wrapped in cloth, facing the sea. The Guanche story isn't solely one of disappearance. It's also a narrative of rediscovery, of reawakening to the unseen histories within familiar places, of realizing that even in a world mapped and measured, hidden cultures continue to whisper from beneath the surface. Their voices may be silent, their language lost, but the islands remember, the stones remember, and we are slowly learning to listen again, because history, even in silence, leaves a mark. And the Guanches, elusive, enduring, gentle, remain a quiet part of that deeper human story, one not only of conquest, but of memory, resilience, and rediscovery.